The impound lot on Garfield Avenue smelled of motor oil baked into cracked asphalt, and the August heat pressed down on everything like a hand that would not lift. The Jaguar sat in the far corner, rust blooming across its flanks in patches the color of dried blood, its windscreen fogged from the inside with the particular gray of long abandonment. Rebecca Vaughn, CEO of Vaughn Property Group, arrived in a white SUV that cost more than most people earned in a year. She looked at the car the way a person looks at something left on the sidewalk. "That thing," she said to her COO, Marcus Hale, loud enough for the small crowd of auction goers to hear, "is an embarrassment to the zip code." She did not know that the quiet man standing 12 feet away, wearing a canvas work shirt with a small grease stain at the cuff, had spent 11 years restoring Jaguars for private collectors in 3 countries. She did not know that he had read the chassis plate in the first 4 seconds and gone very still. Ethan Cole paid $300 for the car. His daughter Mia, 7 years old, stood beside him holding a stuffed bear with one ear worn smooth. She did not ask why her father's hands were trembling. What happened over the next 60 days would cost Rebecca Vaughn something money could not easily replace. The smell of the auction house coffee was burnt and thin, the kind that sits in a paper cup long enough to become something else entirely. And Ethan Cole had been standing near the back of the room for 40 minutes before the Jaguar's lot number was called. He had not planned to be there. Roy Castillo, his one full-time employee at Cole Restorations, a small garage on the east side of Millhaven that smelled of solvent and old rubber, had texted him a photograph the previous evening, 3 words beneath it, "You should see." Roy was 41, a former body shop foreman with a gray streak in his hair, and the habit of saying the minimum necessary. He had worked with Ethan for 6 years and had learned that Ethan's silences were not emptiness. They were conclusions. Ethan had looked at the photograph for a long time. The car in it was a Jaguar E-Type Series 1, buried under decades of surface rust and neglect, its chrome stripped to bare metal in places, its leather interior collapsed into itself like something that had given up. Most people would have seen junk. Ethan saw a sequence of details that did not add up to junk at all. He told Mia he would be back before dinner, kissed the top of her head, and drove to the auction house alone. He had come to this kind of work late, or rather, he had come back to it. For 11 years before Mia was born, Ethan had worked as a senior restoration consultant for Ashford Classics, a firm in Bristol that handled commissions for private collectors, estate sales, and occasionally national automotive museums. He had rebuilt engines that had not run since the 1960s. He had sourced parts from 3 continents. He had written condition reports that determined the insurance valuations of cars worth more than houses. He had been, in the quiet language of that world, very good. The kind of good that does not announce itself. Then Claire got sick. It was a fast illness, the kind that does not negotiate. She was 34. Mia was 18 months old. In the 14 months between diagnosis and the morning, Ethan sat in the hospital corridor and understood that the corridor was now a permanent feature of his life. He had made one decision that he never revisited. He would not travel anymore. He would not take commissions that required months abroad. He would not be the father who was always somewhere else. He opened the small garage in Mill Haven, took local work, kept his rates modest, and raised Mia in a house where the lights were always on when she came home. The bear, its name was Barnaby, a name Mia had chosen with the solemnity of a 7-year-old who understood it mattered, had been Claire's last gift. She had bought it 3 weeks before the end, when she could still sit up. Mia carried it everywhere. Ethan had never asked her to put it down. He was not a man who spoke about any of this. Roy knew the outline. No one else at the auction house that morning knew anything about him at all. Rebecca Vaughn arrived 20 minutes after Ethan. She was 47, dressed in the kind of clothes that signal money without trying to, and she moved through the room with the ease of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around her. She was there for a different lot, a parcel of commercial property adjacent to the impound lot, which Vaughn Property Group intended to redevelop. The Jaguar was incidental, a nuisance, in fact. The car had been impounded from a property she had already purchased, and its presence in the auction catalog was a bureaucratic irritant she had mentioned to Marcus Hale twice that week. Haley was a precise man, thin-shouldered, with the manner of someone who had spent his career managing the distance between what his employer wanted and what the law permitted. He had arranged for the Jaguar's reserve to be set at $250, low enough to move quickly, high enough to technically comply with the auction house's minimum. He had not disclosed to the auctioneer that the car had been flagged in a preliminary assessment as potentially significant. That assessment had been one paragraph written by a junior appraiser named Derek Fossey, who had since moved to a firm in Charlotte. Hale had filed it. He had not forwarded it. He had also arranged separately for a contracted demolition service called Garfield Clearance Solutions to schedule a crusher unit at the impound lot for the following Tuesday. The plan being that the Jaguar would sell at auction and be transferred immediately, clearing the lot for Vaughn Property Group's site survey. What Hale had not anticipated was that the buyer would be standing in the room, would pay cash, and would have the car on a flatbed before the afternoon was out. Ethan bid $300. No one bid against him. Rebecca Vaughn, standing near the window with her coffee, watched the gavel come down and said something to Hale that made him nod. She did not look at Ethan. She had not looked at him once. The crusher had already been scheduled. By the time Hale understood that the flatbed was on the highway, he understood also that the Tuesday demolition order was now a piece of paperwork pointing at an empty space. He made a call. He canceled the unit. He did not mention the cancellation to Rebecca Vaughn because explaining it would have required explaining the appraisal note he had filed and not forwarded. And that was a conversation he was not prepared to have. Ethan drove behind the flatbed in his truck. Mia was in the passenger seat, Barnaby in her lap. She watched the Jaguar ahead of them and said, "Is it sick?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "It's tired," he said. "Can you fix tired?" He thought about that for a moment. "Usually," he said. Roy was waiting when they pulled in. He walked a slow circle around the car without speaking, then crouched near the rear quarter panel and pressed one finger lightly against the rust. He stood up. "When do we start?" he said. Ethan looked at the car for a long moment. The evening light came through the garage door at a low angle and caught the old paint beneath the rust. A deep metallic green that had survived everything that had been done to it. "Tomorrow," Ethan said. The car sat in the garage that night, with the light still on. The chassis plate was the size of a playing card, riveted to the firewall in a position that required a man to lie on his back and angle a flashlight just so, and it smelled of the particular cold metal smell that old cars carry in their bones joints, the kind that does not wash off a person's hands for hours. Ethan found it on the first morning. He lay under the car for a long time, longer than Roy expected. And when he ran out, his expression had not changed in any way that a stranger would notice. Roy noticed. "What did you find?" Roy said. Ethan set the flashlight on the workbench. "Get the reference binders," he said. "The pre-62 Jaguar production logs. The gray ones, second shelf." Roy got them. What Ethan had found was a chassis number that did not belong in any standard production sequence. The number confirmed something he had suspected from the photograph the previous evening. This was not a standard E-type. It was a pre-production prototype, one of a small number built in the early 1960s before the public launch, used for engineering evaluation, and then dispersed in ways that were only partially documented. He did not know that the car had last been cataloged in 1987 in a private collection in the south of France, and that its subsequent disappearance had been the subject of a brief, inconclusive inquiry by the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust. He only knew what the plate told him, and what the plate told him was enough to make him sit down on the shop stool and be very quiet for a while. Roy watched him. "That's serious?" Roy said. "Possibly," Ethan said. The footage had not been shot by Ethan or Roy. It had been shot by a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been walking past the impound lot on the Tuesday morning when the Garfield Clearance Solutions truck arrived. Hale's cancellation call had not reached the driver in time. She had filmed for 40 seconds on her iPhone 15, the crusher arm positioning over the lot, Mia standing in the foreground with Barnaby pressed to her chest, and Ethan beside her, not moving, not speaking, his hands at his sides, and his face entirely still. He had driven to the lot that morning because he had received an automated notice from the auction house about outstanding paperwork. And he had brought Mia because school did not start until 9. He had not known the crusher would be there. He stood and watched it idle in the lot for the length of time it took the driver to confirm the cancellation by phone. And then it left. He said nothing. He did not look at the small crowd of onlookers who had gathered. He took Mia's hand and walked back to the truck. Patricia Osei posted the footage that evening with a caption that said only, "They nearly crushed this man's car while his little girl watched." Does anyone know what kind of car this was? The footage spread in the way that footage spreads when it contains something people cannot categorize. Not outrage exactly, not sentiment exactly, but a combination that makes people feel they are witnessing something that should not have been allowed to happen. By the second morning, it had reached them automotive history forums, where someone with the username Coventry86 posted a frame capture and asked whether anyone could identify the chassis. 3 people identified it within 6 hours. One of them was a collector named James Whitfield, who noted the body lines, the front valance configuration, and the deep metallic green, and said the car was consistent with the pre-production E-Type series. He said someone should find out where the car had gone. Mia came to the garage after school that day, as she did most days. She set Barnaby on the workbench, his usual position, propped against the parts catalog, and walked around the Jaguar with her hands clasped behind her back, the way she had seen her father walk around cars. She stopped at the front and looked at the headlamps. "It has sad eyes," she said. "It's been somewhere difficult," Ethan said. She accepted this, pulled a stool close, and did her homework at the workbench while Ethan and Roy worked. This was the ordinary texture of their evenings, and Ethan valued it in a way he would not have known how to say out loud. On day 2, Ethan photographed the chassis plate from 6 angles using the macro lens he kept above the parts washer. He cross-referenced the number against the production logs and against 2 additional reference texts he ordered overnight from Motor Books International in Stillwater, Minnesota. The number appeared in one of them, in a footnote, in a list of pre-production vehicles whose whereabouts were described as unknown. On day 3, he contacted the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust by email, using language that was careful and specific without being declarative. He described what he had found, attached the photographs, and asked whether they had any record of the chassis number in their archives. He sent the email at 11:40 in the evening, after Mia was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Roy arrived the next morning to find Ethan already under the car. He had been there since 6. On day 5, the trust responded. The email was signed by their senior archivist, Dr. Philip Garrett, and it was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt. The second said that the chassis number corresponded to a vehicle in their pre-production records, one of 9 such cars built in 1960 for internal engineering evaluation, whose whereabouts had been listed as unverified since 1991. The third paragraph asked Christage whether Ethan would be willing to facilitate a formal inspection. Ethan read the email twice, printed it, and set it on the workbench next to Barnaby. Roy read it standing up and set it back down without comment. On day 7, Ethan called Dr. Garrett. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Garrett's voice carried the particular quality of a man trying to remain professionally measured, while something underneath was not entirely measured. By the end of the call, Garrett had confirmed he would arrange a formal inspection and bring a second archivist as a witness. He said the trust would issue a written statement of provenance if the inspection confirmed what the chassis number suggested. Ethan thanked him and hung up. Mia was in the garage doorway. She had heard the end of the call. "Is the car going to be okay?" she said. Ethan looked at her. "It's going to be more than okay," he said. The undocumented component was a small one. It was a fuel distribution manifold, hand machined from aluminum, fitted to the engine in a way that was not in any service manual Ethan owned, and not in any parts catalog he had ever consulted. It was not a modification. It was an original installation made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, fitted before the car left the factory. The machining marks were consistent with hand finishing. The tolerances were extraordinary. He did not know at that moment what it meant. He knew only that it did not belong to the standard specification, and that the standard specification was already exceptional. Roy photographed the manifold from every angle using the macro lens, with a ruler in frame for scale. He photographed the mounting points, the feed lines, the hand stamp marks on the underside. He did this methodically, without being asked, because he had worked with Ethan long enough to understand what thoroughness looked like and what it was for. Mia came after school and walked to the workbench to look at the components laid out on the cloth. She pointed at the manifold. "What's that one?" she said. "A part that someone made by hand," Ethan said. She considered this. "Like how you make things." "Better than me," Ethan said. "Whoever made this was very good." She nodded and named it the way she named things. "Gerald," she said. Roy did not smile, but something in his face shifted slightly. On day 16, Ethan sent photographs of the manifold to 3 people. Dr. Philip Garrett at the Heritage Trust, a retired Jaguar engineer named Bernard Howell, whom Ethan had worked with briefly at Ashford Classics 12 years earlier, and a specialist in pre-production Jaguar documentation named Carla Desai, who ran an archive in Coventry and whose monograph on the E-type development program Ethan had read twice. Howell responded first, within 4 hours. His email was short. "Where did you find this car? Call me." Ethan called him. The conversation lasted an hour and 20 minutes. Howell was 73, and his voice carried the quality of a man who had spent his life knowing that most people did not know were worth knowing. He said the manifold was consistent with a series of hand-installed components fitted to the pre-production evaluation cars as part of an undocumented performance assessment program run internally in 1960 and 1961. The components had not been cataloged in any public document. He had seen references to them in internal memos during his time at the factory, but had never seen one in person. "You have one in person," Ethan said. "So it seems," Howell said. On day 18, Carla Desai responded. Her email was longer and more precise. She had cross-referenced the photographs against her archive and found a single reference, a handwritten note in a 1961 internal document listing the chassis numbers of cars fitted with the experimental manifold assembly. Chassis number 860004 was on the list. She attached a scan of the original document. The handwriting was faded but legible. The chassis number was there, in ink, 63 years old. Ethan printed the scan and added it to the fireproof box where he kept Mia's birth certificate and Claire's death certificate and the deed to the garage. On day 20, Desai drove to Millhaven and spent 2 hours with the car, taking her own photographs and measurements. At the end of the visit, she said she would include a formal notation in her archive attributing the identification of the component to Ethan's examination. She said it in the matter-of-fact way of someone recording a fact, not conferring a compliment. Ethan said, "Thank you." Shortly after, a collector named James Whitfield, who had been searching for chassis 860004 for 11 years and had now seen Desai's preliminary notation, sent Ethan an email asking a technical question about the manifold's mounting configuration and mentioning in the final line how long he had been looking. Ethan sat with that email for a day before he wrote back, answered the technical question precisely, and said he would be in touch regarding the car's future. Mia asked that evening whether Gerald was important. Ethan looked at her for a moment. "Gerald," he said, "is very important." She tucked Barnaby under her arm and went to brush her teeth. The garage was quiet after she left, and the light stayed on late. The formal provenance certificate from the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust arrived by courier on a Thursday on official letterhead, signed by Dr. Garrett and countersigned by the Trust's director. It described chassis 860004 as a confirmed pre-production Jaguar E-type prototype of exceptional historical significance, one of 9 surviving examples from the 1960 Engineering Evaluation Program, and the only one known to retain its original hand-installed manifold assembly in situ. It included Carla Desai's supplementary technical report, the scan of the 1961 internal document, and a written statement from Bernard Howell attesting to the historical significance of the component. The certificate also carried an appraiser's valuation note prepared by the Trust's affiliated assessor, placing the car's market value in a range that Ethan read twice before he set the paper down. The car was worth considerably more than $300. He did not call anyone. He went inside and made Mia's lunch. James Whitfield posted a public response to the certificate's release that ran to 4 paragraphs. The final paragraph said, "This is one of the most significant Jaguar discoveries in 30 years. The fact that it was nearly destroyed is something the community will be discussing for a long time." The automotive press picked up the story within 48 hours. 3 publications ran pieces. 2 of them named Ethan. One of them named Vaughn Property Group. Marcus Hale read the coverage and understood, in the specific way that a careful man understands a miscalculation, that the appraisal note he had filed and not forwarded had become a document with consequences. Rebecca Vaughn read the same coverage in her office on a Thursday morning. Her assistant brought it to her on a tablet, and she read it twice, and then she sat for a while without speaking. She called Hale into the office. The conversation was brief. Hale emerged looking the way a man looks when a door has closed behind him that he had not expected to close. His role in setting the reserve, scheduling the demolition, and suppressing Derek Foss's appraisal note was now a matter of public record, cited in 2 of the 3 press pieces by name. That afternoon, Rebecca Vaughn called Ethan herself. Her voice, when he answered, was not the voice she had used in the impound lot. It was lower, more careful. The register of someone who has done the arithmetic and arrived at a number they did not expect. She told him she had not been given complete information about the vehicle before the auction. She said she understood that did not change what had happened. She said she would like to discuss the situation and also whether there was a way for Vaughn Property Group to be useful to him going forward. Her firm acquired estate vehicles regularly, and he needed someone who could assess them accurately. Her voice carried the particular quality of a near apology that has been composed by someone who is not accustomed to composing them. Ethan listened to all of it. Then he said he appreciated the call and that he would think about it. He set the phone down on the workbench and stood in the garage for a moment in the quiet of work that does not need to announce itself. The auction listing went live the following week through Christie's Motor Cars division. Within 48 hours, the collector community had found it. The forums moved fast. The photographs were shared. The certificate was cited. The chassis number was cross-referenced against every known registry until the consensus hardened into something that could not be argued with. A car believed lost for decades had come back because a man in a small shop had known what to look for and had looked carefully enough to find it. The bids opened high and climbed. The hammer price, when the auction closed on a Saturday evening, was a number that would have been difficult to say out loud in the impound lot without sounding like a fiction. The buyer was a private collector in Geneva who had been searching for a documented pre-production E-type for 9 years. The Christie's record confirmed Ethan's restoration work and the manifold's provenance in writing publicly in a document that would follow the car for the rest of its existence. Ethan did not attend the auction. He was at the shop, and Mia was beside him, drawing something in her sketchbook with the focused, unhurried attention of a child who has learned that some things are worth looking at for a long time. He drove home through streets that were mostly empty by then, the kind of quiet that settles over a town after 10 o'clock when the last lights have gone off in the shop windows. and the road holds nothing but the sound of tires on wet pavement. The truck smelled of metal and solvent, and the faint trace of coffee finished hours ago. He did not have the radio on. The house was dark except for the garage light. He had left it burning that morning the way he always did when he knew he would be coming home late, a habit he had started after Claire died, some small arrangement he had made with himself so that the house would not be entirely dark when he pulled into the driveway. It was not a large thing. It was the kind of small, kept promise that accumulates into the shape of a life. Mia was asleep. He stood in her doorway long enough to hear her breathing. Her sketchbook was open on the pillow beside her, a half-finished drawing he could not quite make out in the low light. He pulled the blanket up and left the door the way she liked it, not quite closed. He went back out to the garage and stood there for a while in the light, not doing anything in particular, just standing in the space where the work had been done. The bench was clear. The tools were put away. The smell of the finished job still hung in the air, clean metal and old oil and the solvent that never fully leave a working space. What he had done was not complicated to describe. He had looked carefully at something other people had looked at carelessly, and he had known what he was seeing because he had spent years learning how to see it. The car had always been what it was. The value had always been there. It had not needed anyone to declare it. It had only needed someone patient enough to find it. Loud dismissal moves fast. Disciplined looking takes longer, and it tends to last. He turned off the garage light and went inside.